This story is just disturbing. Listen to me.
But first, a story 25 Investigates has been working on for weeks.
State police initially ruled her death as suicide.
It involves the Sandra Birchmore murder investigation, so let's get right to it.
On February 4th, 2021, coworkers of Sandra Birchmore called the police. The 23-year-old Sandra hasn't shown up to work that day, which is very unusual for someone normally so reliable. The police offer to do what's called a welfare check. So, a patrol car drives to Sandra's address and rings the doorbell to see if everything is okay, but no one answers. The officers decide to enter the apartment. Immediately, they notice a strong, unpleasant smell. Sandra Birchmore is found dead in her home. It looks like she's been lying there for between 48 and 72 hours. At first, everything appears to point towards suicide. The body is found in a sitting position on the floor. Around her neck is a piece of rope, which is tied to the doorknob of a wardrobe. Based on that, the initial report states, death by suicide through hanging. Sandra's family is in shock. It's true that the young woman hadn't had an easy life, but in the last days and weeks, there were absolutely no signs that anything was wrong. On the contrary, the 23-year-old seemed happier than ever. But when her family begins to clear out Sandra's apartment after the first wave of grief, they come across several strange items. These objects are part of a puzzle that slowly begins to come together, and this puzzle leads to a different idea. Sandra didn't take her own life. She was murdered. And behind this crime is not just the reputation of one man at risk, but the reputation of an entire institution. At the end of 2020, everything still seems fine in Sandra's life. No one could have guessed that only a few months later she would be dead. Sandra is 23 years old at the time and finally feels like her life is on solid ground. But she's had anything but an easy journey. Her father died before she was even born. She grows up with her mother and grandmother. But when Sandra reaches her teenage years, both of them die shortly after one another. Sandra is left to fend for herself at a very young age and ends up living with a new family. After all these painful events, what Sandra needs more than anything is stability. That's exactly why at the age of 12, Sandra signs up for a youth program. It's run by the local police and is called the Staunton Police Explorers Academy. The program is meant to introduce young people to the work of law enforcement. The enrolled kids and teens are guided through various activities by real trained police officers from Staunton. Over time, the police explorers become an important part of Sandra's life. Whenever school gets stressful, or things at home feel overwhelming, or when she's simply bored, she goes to the academy meetings. Over the years, a close-knit community forms, not just among the kids, but also between graduates of the program and the adult mentors. These mentors are usually police officers themselves and help guide the kids through everything. One of those mentors is Matthew Farwell. He even helps Sandra with her homework from time to time. Or at least, that's what the now 15-year-old Sandra tells her friends. But in reality, something very different seems to be going on. Because 27-year-old Matthew, who is married by the way, is not just meeting up with the much younger girl to do homework. Instead, he takes advantages of the trust this teenage girl has placed in him, without any regard for her vulnerability. Sandra and Matthew have intercourse. There's no indication that Matthew forces her at first, but this is still an affair between a 27-year-old married police officer and a 15-year-old high school student from a troubled background. It should be clear to all of us that in a situation like this, real consent is pretty much impossible. On top of that, Matthew has sick fantasies that he begins to act out. He convinces Sandra to play the role of a helpless victim, someone he can act out on. This all starts in April 2013. As mentioned, Sandra is 15 years old at the time, but Matthew has already known her for about a year and a half. They've been meeting regularly since September 2011, which means Sandra was just 14 when it all began. Throughout her entire time in high school, this relationship continues. Matthew, her mentor, also meets with her outside of academy hours, sometimes even when he's supposed to be on duty as a police officer. This goes on for years. Matthew's wife doesn't notice anything at home. She remains unaware. They have 2 children together, and their 3rd baby is expected in February 2021. Sandra, now 23 years old, has been involved with Matthew, if you can even call it that, for 8 years. When she learns through acquaintances that Matthew's wife is pregnant again, she thinks about sending the wife a message. After all, she has no idea that her husband has been in an affair with a girl who was underage at the beginning of their involvement. Sandra even writes out the message to Matthew's wife, but then moves it into her drafts folder. She never sends it. The thing is, Sandra is stuck, and not just in one way. Back in October 2020, she gave Matthew an ultimatum. Either she would tell his wife about the affair, or she would stop taking protection from now on. Yes, you heard that right. Sandra consciously decides that she no longer wants to use protection when being intimate with Matthew, because she wants a baby from him. Sandra and Matthew even plan their meetups around Sandra's ovulation cycle in order to increase her chances of having a baby. All of this is happening while Matthew's wife is pregnant at home, completely unaware of the affair. At the end of December 2020, Sandra realizes that her plan has worked. She is in fact pregnant. She tells Matthew immediately, sending him a message with a drawing she made herself. On the colorful sign, it says, "You're going to be a dad." But Matthew doesn't react the way she hoped. Even when they have a serious conversation just before New Year's Eve, the mood doesn't get any better. Sandra confides in a friend. She says that Matthew told her he didn't want anything to do with her or the baby, and that the best thing that could happen would be if Sandra died. And just over a month later, that's exactly what will happen. And what follows will be much, much worse. On January 20th, 2021, an anonymous caller contacts the police in Staunton. The person says they're a friend of Sandra Birchmore, and that Sandra had told them about her relationship with police officer Matthew Farwell, a relationship that started when she was much younger. The officer who takes the call writes everything down, but instead of passing the information on to his supervisor, he decides not to tell anyone. He doesn't inform his boss that fellow officer Matthew Farwell, in his role as a mentor in the youth academy, had a relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Instead, the officer goes directly to Matthew, and Matthew immediately gets angry. He tells his colleague to never speak another word about the matter again. So, it's completely clear that what he did was wrong, using his position of trust at the age of 27 to take advantage of 15-year-old Sandra. Now he's trying desperately to cover up his actions and stop the truth from coming out. He also confronts Sandra about the incident. But Sandra had no idea that her friend had called Matthew's workplace. From Sandra's point of view, this situation seems like a turning point, like Matthew is finally starting to get his act together. On January 24th, 2021, Sandra sends a message to a friend. Things are going well, though unexpectedly. It kind of threw me off and made me a little uneasy, but that's just because of how things have gone so far. He asked me if I'd give him a key to my apartment and said that if I didn't tell anyone, he'd stay in touch and come visit the baby and all that. So it's happening. Then he looked in my closet and then in the bathroom, but I don't know why. I haven't figured that out yet. Maybe Sandra thought Matthew was looking at her closet and bathroom to help prepare for the baby. That topic at this point takes up all of her attention, and understandably so. Despite how questionable the situation is, she really wanted the baby. During the last days of January, Sandra stays busy. She buys baby clothes, makes medical appointments, and starts planning how she's going to share the news of her pregnancy with her family and friends. She even starts thinking about baby names, but she doesn't want to decide on her own. She texts Matthew and asks for suggestions. He replies that he'd talk about it in person. On the evening of February 1st at around 9 p.m., Matthew messages Sandra to ask if he can stop by for a moment. He arrives around 9:15 p.m. and stays for just under half an hour. Sandra Birchmore will never leave her apartment again. Not even 24 hours later, on February 2nd, 2021, Matthew's wife gives birth to the couple's third child. While the Farwell family's at home, welcoming the new baby and spending the first few days together, things look very different for Sandra's friends. They are busy clearing out Sandra's apartment. To their surprise, they find lots of baby items. Sandra hadn't even told her friends or family about the pregnancy. Her loved ones reach out to the police again. They can't understand how Sandra could have taken her own life, especially when she had already started preparing for the baby, even though the pregnancy was still in an early stage. It just doesn't add up. The police orders an autopsy on Sandra Birchmore's body. The pregnancy is confirmed. Then, someone from Sandra's circle gives the police a crucial tip. The only possible father is Matthew Farwell. That sets off major alarm bells among her friends. According to them, Matthew had become violent with Sandra the weeks before her death. They say he pushed her and threatened her during some of their meetings. A patrol officer questions Matthew on February 6th, but not in an official setting. The conversation happens in the middle of a parking lot. Matthew gives statements that completely contradict what Sandra's friends have said. He claims that he and Sandra may have slept together 2 or 3 times in 2020, but there's no way the baby could be his. Matthew also tells the officer that Sandra had serious mental health issues and had even been committed multiple times. But that's a huge exaggeration. The truth is, Sandra was once taken to a psychiatric facility. That was in May 2020, after a fight with a family member. And she was released the same day. So during this informal conversation with his fellow officer, Matthew insists that he can't be the father. As we now know, that's a flat-out lie. But here's the twist. Matthew isn't the only possible father of Sandra's baby. The second potential father is his own twin brother, William Farwell. He's also a police officer in Staunton, and just like his brother, William had been sleeping with Sandra regularly and over a long period of time before her death. We now have not just one, but 2 police officers directly connected to the victim, at least one of whom began grooming and sleeping with her when she was just 15 years old. As more and more of this comes to light, Sandra's family becomes increasingly certain this was never suicide. They believe Sandra was murdered, and not necessarily by Matthew Farwell alone. In their eyes, his brother William could very well be involved too. Sandra's friends and family spend over 2 years fighting for the case to be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. And that's no easy task, because both Matthew and William Farwell are part of the local police force. But after 2 long years, there is finally an arrest, and with it, even more shocking details are revealed. As of summer 2024, Matthew Farwell is officially charged with the murder of Sandra Birchmore. He allegedly strangled her and staged it to look like a suicide. The wardrobe where she was supposedly found hanging? That's the same wardrobe Matthew had inspected a few days earlier. Something Sandra had even texted a friend about, saying she found it strange. Matthew no longer worked as a police officer by that time. 2 months after Sandra's death, he resigned. Shortly afterward, 2 other officers from Staunton were fired. One of them was William, Matthew's twin brother. The other was Robert Devine. Both of them had also worked as mentors in the youth academy. Both were dismissed over accusations that they had inappropriate relationships with Sandra Birchmore. No further details about that are publicly known, but considering what Matthew did to Sandra, people fear the worst. Sandra's family had to fight for more than 2 years just to get her death reclassified as a homicide. Until just a few months ago, her official cause of death was still listed as suicide. It was only thanks to an independent forensic expert, hired by Sandra's family, that the cause of death was changed to homicide. That's why the trial against the 3 accused officers won't begin until sometime in 2025, 3 years after Sandra Birchmore's death. And hopefully Sandra will finally get the justice that was denied to her while she was alive. While everyone waits for the trial against Matthew Farwell, the anger in Staunton remains high, not just among Sandra's loved ones, but throughout the community. After all, 3 police officers who worked with kids in a youth program are accused of truly horrifying things. Exactly what kind of inappropriate relationships Sandra had with William and Robert may be revealed during the trial. Most likely, prosecutors are still gathering evidence and taking statements from others who were part of the academy program as teenagers. What's clear is this case isn't just about a suspected murder. It's also about a total betrayal of public trust, especially the trust that young people are supposed to have in police. Here, the supposed protect and serve figure is, allegedly, the one who became the abuser, abusing his power and position in the worst way. That's exactly why it's so important to say, if you're in a similar situation, speak up. Tell someone, even when it's incredibly hard, even when it feels like you're going up against powerful people or institutions. Mutual trust and listening are crucial. It's the only way to stop something like what happened to Sandra Birchmore from happening again. Also, I'd love to know what you think about today's case. Do you know of other cases that are similar and deserve more attention? Drop your thoughts and suggestions in the comments. Here you can find another just unbelievable case. Click on it. See you soon. Until then, stay safe.